Prejudice causes a colonel's trip to put a brother in arms to rest to be interrupted, and the repercussions came quickly. Don't miss the next installment, subscribe now, and tell us where you are viewing this from in the comments. Marcus Reed walked out of the shadows. A cab, the burden of his mission sitting on his shoulders like the medals on his chest. The commotion of airport activity around him, engines idling, baggage wheels scraping across pavement, and people rushing toward their destinations. It was a brilliant day with the sun high in the sky. But Marcus's mind was preoccupied with something else. Marcus's thoughts were far from the light, and his eyes went to the papers in his fingers. These were the documentation for carrying the corpse of his fallen colleague. The soldier who was lying in that coffin was not just any ordinary person. Thomas Keller, a private first-class soldier, had been Marcus's closest friend. Keller was a white guy, treated Marcus as if he were a brother, both on and off the battlefield. They shared meals, laughter, and the grim reality of combat. When Keller was killed in a surprise attack overseas, Marcus had sworn that he would personally escort his friend's body back to his hometown for a proper burial. However, nothing ever came of that promise. Nothing to prevent him from keeping that commitment. Marcus straightened his military dress uniform and polished his shoes, which clicked on the pavement as he proceeded toward the entrance of the airport. His medals, which he had acquired through hard work, reflected the sunshine, but he was determined to fulfill his promise. As he approached the door, he took a deep breath and prepared himself for what he believed would be a pleasant journey inside the airport. Instead of feeling pride, he carried the burden of loss. As he entered the terminal, the surroundings transformed and displays presented information. Flight itineraries and the aroma of coffee from nearby kiosks, combined with the aroma of jet fuel that lingered from the open doors of the runway. People were in transit, lost in their own worlds. Marcus's uniform caught the attention of a few individuals, but no one stopped to salute or offer their respects. Give words of thanks that did not come as a surprise to him at the check-in desk, where a young lady with a tight hairdo and a clean uniform welcomed him with a false grin and asked for his ticket and identification. Marcus gave over his paperwork. In addition to his military identification, he said, "I am here to transport a military casket." His voice was low but calm, and he continued, "I am a private first-class Thomas Keller." Everything was organized. The lady examined the paperwork, her grin fading and her eyes flickering up to the skies. "Meet his cautious and guarded, you're the officer in command?" she asked, as if the thought startled her. "Yeah, I am," Marcus answered, keeping his tone calm. He'd been through this before, the subtle doubt people carried when they saw a black man in uniform. The woman gave the documents back with a little scowl on her face. "1 second, Mrs. I need to check something." She leaned toward her colleague, whispering something Marcus couldn't make out. Despite the fact that the tone was unmistakably suspicious, both ladies stared at him. Before one of them took up the phone and began mumbling into the handset, Marcus felt a knot tighten in his gut. He knew when someone was fishing for problems because he had seen that expression enough times in his life to know it quickly. Standing tall, he weighted palms on his chest. He had clenched behind his back, concentrating on the promise he had made to Keller. Passengers moved around him, oblivious to the tension that was brewing at the counter. Eventually, another employee appeared. He was a middle-aged man with a stiff posture and a scowl, and he approached Marcus with an air of authority. Looking him over and over again. "Colonel Reed, is it?" the guy questioned, peering at the documents in Marcus's palm as if expecting them to disappear. "We just need to perform a routine verification." Marcus clenched his teeth and held back the rage that was rising in him. "I need to board the aircraft as soon as possible. The family is waiting for the arrival." The guy gave him a once-over his expression. "Blank. I'm going to need to see that ID again," he stated, as if Marcus's identity was in question. Inside him, everything is in order. All of the documentation is there. "I need to board the flight as soon as possible." Marcus obliged without uttering a single word, pulling his identification from his pocket. The guy took it with deliberate slowness, studying it as if it were counterfeit. Every second felt like a slap to Marcus's face. The uniform and medals were not sufficient evidence. Following an awkwardly lengthy pause, the guy returned the identification card with a shrug and stated, "It appears to be in good condition. However, I need to contact security as a precaution." Marcus's heart dropped as he asked security about the policy. The man responded with a tight-lipped grin, "We need to make sure that everything is in order." Despite his status, his decorations, and his purpose, they saw only one thing: a black man with a claim that they found difficult to believe. Marcus kept his ground, despite the fact that rage was simmering under his cool demeanor. He could see where this was headed. It is hard to imagine that only a few minutes later, 2 security officials came. Their body language was rigid and unpleasant, and one of them, a stocky guy with a shaved head, instantly seized charge of the situation. Marcus, the employee, nodded toward him and said, "What's the problem here? We need to check his credentials since he is claiming to be a colonel and accompanying a military coffin." The officer gave Marcus a harsh look with his arms crossed over his chest. "Colonel, you'll need to see your papers." Marcus extended the paperwork once again. Retaining his voice even though all of the proper documentation is here, this is a transport of military honor. The officer glanced over the papers. His expression on his face was inscrutable and professional seeming. "But we are going to have to send you to secondary screening." "Secondary screening, Marcus." This wasn't about procedure. It was about control, about reminding him where they felt he was in the hierarchy, and he swallowed his words as he repeated his tone, which was filled with skepticism. "I have everything in order." The officer didn't flinch. "It's just routine." Sir Marcus knew better. They escorted him through the airport past interested passengers and staff members who were muttering to a tiny screening room that was hidden from public view. The room smelled of stale air and cleaning chemicals, and there was a metal table in the middle of the room surrounded by war. He nodded with pride. "Seats, lay your possessions on the table." One officer directed Marcus to obey the directions, unclipping his medals and placing them among his paperwork. Marcus's heart ached as he placed down the tiny souvenir that Keller's wife had given him, which was a dog tag engraved with Keller's name. They inspected him thoroughly, their hands chilly and uncaring. They even scrutinized the folded flag he carried as if it would contain something nefarious. And when the search was over, one of the officers gave a curt nod. Name and service number, they searched him. Colonel Marcus gathered up his belongings and slowly and precisely reattached the medals to his uniform. His hand shook slightly, not because of fear, but rather because of the weight of dissatisfaction that comes from the fact that the officers didn't do what they were supposed to. Marcus straightened his back and slipped Keller's dog tag into his pocket before walking out of the room without a word. They did not apologize or give an explanation. Instead, they just opened the door, expecting him to depart as if nothing had occurred. The room, the promise to his buddy burning brightly than ever in his heart, and the fact that he would bring Keller home whatever of the challenges that lay ahead of him as he re-entered the bustling terminal. His eyes searched the departure board, and his flight was the one that was scheduled to depart. He took a deep breath, adjusted his hat, and strode toward the gate. The trip was not yet complete, and he knew that the most difficult portion was yet to come. Marcus was not going to allow anything stop him from achieving his goal. Each additional hurdle was another test of his patience. Marcus was seated in the waiting room with his back straight. Despite the tiredness that was pressing down on him, his military stance never wavered. This was the case even when the frustration that was building up inside of him was being subdued by the drone of the overhead speakers. There were flight updates, the most of which faded into background noise, but Marcus heard nothing except the ticking of the clock in his thoughts. Every second that he spent at this airport was another instant that he had stolen from his quest to bring Keller home. He removed Keller's dog tag from his pocket running a hand over the engraved name. The memory of that final discussion with his buddy remained as a reminder of the commitment he was determined to keep. No matter how many difficulties they placed in his way, he would complete his intention to maintain the promise. It was the voice of Lieutenant Colonel Reed that shook him out of his thoughts. He glanced up to find two security guards towering over him. One of them was a burly guy with a shaved head, while the other was a wiry younger officer who seemed anxious to show something. "You are going with us," he said. Marcus stood slowly while keeping a calm expression. The senior officer yelled. There was no civility, just an undertone of hatred. Marcus stood slowly, maintaining a calm look, and the officer scoffed. "Regular process, sir, unless you've got a cause to make it." Uncomfortable, Marcus felt his jaw tense, but he agreed he had no time for objections. "Not now, lead the way." They walked him toward a smaller security room. The fluorescent lights humming slightly above Marcus entered the room. First, but before he could even turn back, the door closed behind him with a harsh click. "All right, hands on the table," the younger officer said in a voice that was more abrasive than was required. Marcus laid his palm flat on the cold metal table the police were sitting at. Marcus, the elder guard, followed the directions, his expression inscrutable despite the fact that they surrounded him like wolves, and their motions were methodical and slow. It wasn't simply a search, it was a performance that was supposed to humiliate you. "Spread your legs." When they reached his medals, the younger officer scoffed and fingered one of the highest distinctions. "So these make you unique, huh?" Marcus didn't reply to meeting the officer. His hands were slightly clenched and they patted him down, giving extra attention to every fold of his clothing. Officer's eyes with a chilly, unyielding stare. The guard laughed, but glanced away at first, visibly uneasy. "This one believes he's above the laws," the elder guard mumbled as he concluded the search. Marcus breathed slowly while holding his rage in control. He was able to retain his cool. Had seen worse on the battlefield. He would not break here. "You resist." And "soldier," the younger guard mocked him with his voice dripping with cynicism. But Marcus responded calmly, despite the fact that the weight of the phrase carried years of trained experience. Marcus took a minute to examine his choices. He was aware that they were trying to trap him by waiting for him to strike out so that they could justify escalating the situation, but he refused to give them that opportunity. The guard moved closer, his breath heated with scorn. "Good, because we can solve that very soon." Satisfaction before anything more could happen. The door swung open, abruptly. "Is there a problem here?" A deep, commanding voice filled the room. All heads turned to see an elderly man standing in the doorway. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but there was something unmistakably military in his demeanor, a veteran bearing the kind that spoke of. "Battles fought and survived," the elder guard stiffened. "This is a security process, sir. Nothing to worry about." The veteran's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. Marcus stood stiffly, the guards hovering too near his gaze. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he took in the situation. "What is the significance of this?" The guards exchanged anxious looks with one another. You were harassing a distinguished officer," the veteran snarled. That guy is Colonel Marcus Reed. I served with him abroad. What is the meaning of this?" Cutting them off. "I'll make sure your supervisor learns about this." The tension in the room shifted, and for the first time since entering the airport, Marcus felt a glimmer of relief. The veteran moved forward and offered Marcus a firm handshake. "Good to see you, Colonel. It's really great to see you again." "Been too long," Marcus returned the handshake, his scowl softening as he thanked him and expressed his appreciation. The older guard cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "You are free to go." Sir Marcus shot him a glance, his face inscrutable as he knew an answer. The veteran nodded toward the door and said, "Come on, Colonel, let's get out of here." As Marcus exited the room, he quickly looked back at the guards who were standing frozen in place. He did not need to apologize, but in any case, his actions spoke louder than words. After coming to the realization that they had made a mistake in judging the individual who was present in the terminal, Marcus and the veteran strolled side by side. The veteran gave him a knowing glance and said, "Do they still not make it easy for us?" Marcus shook his head and spoke in a low voice. "No, they don't." Marcus's throat clenched, and for a time he was unable to find the words to express his gratitude. He gave the veteran an appreciative nod and then walked toward his gate. Keller was waiting for him. The veteran patted him on the back, "But you hang in there. The voyage was not yet finished, but at least he had overcome one more challenge. As Marcus reached the departure area, he got a glance of the flight board, where the flight status was shown in bright red letters. Marcus quickly closed his eyes. His flight status was delayed. Marcus stood at the gate and the red letters spelled delayed on the screen. He was determined to maintain his composure since he had gone too far to let anything to stop him now. No matter how many obstacles they placed in his path, he would take Keller home one step at a time. Every minute that was spent at this airport seemed like a personal affront to him. It wasn't just about him. It was about Keller's family waiting on the other side, hanging on to their pain. He checked the clock, which was eating away at his patience. Marcus tightened the collar of his uniform and approached the airline counter once again, eager to seek answers. The attendant at the desk was a young lady browsing through her iPad, and she hardly regarded him. She said, "Yes," without looking up my name. Marcus was expecting to bury his kid with dignity. "The flight is delayed and I need information," Marcus stated calmly, even though his aggravation was about to come out. He put the paperwork on the counter, taking care not to come off as belligerent. The lady looked at him, and her demeanor changed. Marcus sighed slowly, the tightness in his chest increasing. "This isn't just ordinary flight. I'm delivering a military coffin. There are particular procedures. Can you at least check the date and time of the trip?" "Flat everyone's flight is delayed, sir. You'll just have to wait like everyone else." At the revised departure time, the attendant shrugged and looked lazily at the computer. "I don't have anything new yet. Check back later," she said. Marcus's tone was dismissive, but he managed to keep his composure. "I need to make sure the casket is in order." Correctly transmitted, "This isn't negotiable." With an exaggerated sigh, she finally made eye contact, frustration darting in her stare. "Sir, I get that you believe your circumstance is unusual, but we're short-staffed, maybe check with." Marcus's patience began to wane, and his heart rate accelerated, but he maintained his composure. He said, "Give me the number for the cargo team." The lady clicked a few keys, scratched a number on a sticky note, and passed it over the counter. Marcus still maintained his composure. Marcus put the letter in his pocket and headed toward the closest phone station. As he contacted the number for cargo services, an unexpected recollection came to the surface. She said, "There, have a good day." Her cynicism was hardly concealed. Marcus slid the paper into his pocket a minute later. On the battlefield, after Keller had absorbed a bullet that was intended for him, Keller's words reverberated in his memory. "Get me home if anything happens. Marcus promised me that he had promised, and no amount of bureaucratic nonsense would stop him now." The cargo crew, on the other hand, proved to be just as useless as the airline workers. Yeah, we are aware of the military transport," the voice on the other end of the line muttered. "But it's a busy day down here, and we'll get to it when we get to it." Marcus grasped the handset even more tightly. "This isn't acceptable. I need proof that the coffin is treated with care and moved correctly." "Look, guy," the cargo worker stated, plainly agitated. "Unless you want to come down here personally, there's nothing more I can tell you." Marcus closed his eyes. As Marcus hung up the phone and walked towards the restricted sector of the airport that he wasn't waiting for, he mustered every last bit of patience he had left and asked the worker to explain him how to go to the cargo area. After a minute of quiet, the man reluctantly gave him the instructions. With the approval of anybody, he would see this through himself at the entrance to the cargo area, where a security guard barred his route. "You can't be here," the guard remarked, folding his arms. Marcus then produced his identity and explained the situation. "Situations, I am here for a military coffin. I need to make sure that it is being transported correctly." The guard hardly looked at the identification. "Rules are rules, you can't just waltz in." Marcus gritted his teeth. "I have authority, this is not optional." The problem. Marcus's blood raced cold at the obvious insult, but he didn't flinch. "Fetch your supervisor now," as the guard gave him a long, hard look. The guard leaned in with a sneer and curled his lip. "Maybe the next time, bring someone who looks the part." After a tense moment, he grumbled under his breath and placed a call on his radio. He said, "Get someone here who thinks he's important." Marcus waited with his fists clenched at his sides. Keller's dog tag in his pocket felt heavier by the minute. He was obviously pondering whether or not to push the situation further. Second, as if encouraging him to keep pushing on regardless of the circumstances, the supervisor came after a number of anxious minutes. He was an elderly guy with weary eyes and a non-nonsense approach. "What exactly is the problem?" Marcus recounted the issue once again, this time spelling out every detail with military precision. The supervisor listened without disturbing his face, which was inscrutable. When Marcus finished, the guy gave a slow nod and said, "All right, I'll let you know. But I can't have you interrupting our operations. I'll keep out of your way." Marcus told him, "I just need to ensure everything is in order." The supervisor opened the gate, and Marcus entered into the crowded cargo area. The supervisor had unlocked the gate. The area was filled with the sound of forklifts and the buzz of machinery. He saw Keller's coffin, which was covered in an American flag and was sitting on a steel platform. He felt a wave of comfort rush over him, but it was fleeting since a worker nearby was calling out in a loud voice, "If you ask me." Marcus's hands were clenched into fists, but he took a steadying breath before addressing them. He was grumbling to his colleague that he couldn't believe we had to lug this thing about like it was something unique. "If you ask me, I'd say that it's just another piece of cargo." He proceeded closer the coffin, adjusting the edges of the flag with meticulous care. He said under his breath, "I've got you, brother, almost there." The moment was holy, but it was disrupted by the harsh voice of the person who had been speaking. Marcus turned around and met the guy's stare without fear. "I'm Colonel Marcus Reed, and this is my mission. Do you have a problem with that?" The man started his mouth to speak, but the other employee said, "Hey, you can't touch that." When he saw the fire in Marcus's eyes, he closed it once again, said something under his breath, and then walked away, leaving Marcus alone with the coffin once more. He made sure that the cargo was securely secured, and he double-checked all of the relevant documents. Marcus made his way back to the terminal, and as he approached the gate, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the airline alerting him that the flight would be delayed even more. Marcus let out a sigh of exasperation through his nose, and as he sat down, the weight of the situation began to weigh heavily on him. It was a day that pulled hard on his shoulders, and the challenges were stacking up one after another, trying his patience and determination. However, he reminded himself that this wasn't just about the travel. It was about the promise he made, a promise that he would honor no matter what. Despite the fact that the world might throw as many barriers as it wanted, Marcus reclined back in his chair and glanced at the blinking delayed sign once again. He was not going to stop. Not now. Not ever. The airport terminal hummed with restless energy as the hours dragged on. Marcus sat silently with his hands folded on his lap, his thoughts a war of tiredness and aggravation. The waiting spaces had become impromptu camps due to the delayed flights, with individuals sprawled over chairs and floors. A sense of dissatisfaction was visible in the air. The knot in his chest tightened with each glance at the departure board. His mission to bring Keller home felt like an uphill climb through layers of systemic disrespect and careless indifference. Just as Marcus thought he could catch a moment of peace, the silence that surrounded him was shattered by the thought of Keller's arrival. Marcus did not react at first since he had been the target of unwelcome attention in the past. A guy in uniform usually stood out in public, but this time something seemed different. There was a bustle coming from behind, and a group of people had collected behind the airline counter, whispering and waving toward him. Their phones were filming. One thing that is unusual is that the individual they were harassing earlier, someone said loud enough for Marcus to hear a colonel write. They were dragged off like a criminal. One by one, passengers started whispering. Phones rose to catch the claimed scandal. A man close. Middle-aged traveler with a sleek tablet walked up and said, "Hey, sir, we saw what happened back there with security." Marcus gave a curt nod and said, "I'm fine, thank you. You don't look fine." The guy responded with his eyes narrowing, and they regarded him with respect. Before Marcus could react, another passenger jumped in, saying, "I got it all on video. They had no reason to search you like that." Marcus shuffled uneasily as other voices joined the conversation. "You like a suspect, not a soldier, that's not right." Conversation phones were aimed at him from every angle, recording his look. He sought to keep things under control, but the narrative was sliding away from him. Someone in the throng said, "If they can do that to a decorated officer, what chance do they have of doing it to me?" The rest of us have a flame that has been lighted, the whispers have become louder, and the discontent has continued to develop into something combustible. By the time Marcus reached the gate once again, the social media platforms of the airport were already humming with hashtags and videos of fury. Of his meeting with security were spreading rapidly. The films filmed from several angles showed him standing stoically, while officers searched him with undue force, their actions dripping in contempt. Marcus's phone vibrated again with. Marcus knew that it would only be a matter of time before journalists came, and he was not mistaken within the hour. Notifications and messages flooded in from strangers expressing their indignation at how he had been handled. The situation was on the verge of exploding out of control. There was a small group of reporters who looked to be equipped with cameras and recorders. They surrounded him as he waited at the gate, asking him pointed and persistent questions. "Colonel Reed, are you able to comment on the treatment you got from airport security? Do you believe this incident?" Marcus kept his face calm despite the fact that his heart was racing, since he knew the media could distort words and whatever he said. "What do you believe this message sends to other military soldiers of color? Represents a broader problem of prejudice against black troops. Now may aggravate the matter more. I have no comment," he responded calmly, folding his arms. "Colonel, please," a reporter pushed, bringing a microphone closer to his face. "The public wants to hear what do you have to say about this." The reporters would not back down, and another journalist, a woman with a determined face, questioned how you feel knowing that the airport workers treated you in such a manner. Marcus breathed slowly, suppressing the impulse to participate in conversation, but the reporters did not back down. "During the time that you were on a mission to carry your friend's remains," that question struck Marcus deeply. The feelings that he had been holding in for hours threatened to come out, but he tightened his teeth and refused to let them see it. He replied one final time, "No comment." Circus, the scenario continued to unravel online as Marcus sought to isolate himself from the media. Circus, the video of his maltreatment went viral with hashtags such as #honor our heroes and #justice for the circus. His voice was steady but chilly. Within hours, hundreds of comments flooded social media, condemning the actions of the airport and seeking for responsibility. Protests started to assemble outside the airport as word of the event spread. Colonel Reed became a hot topic. Groups of people with placards that say "Honor all soldiers and equal treatment" have now collected outside the entrance to the airport. The demonstration has swiftly grown in size, and it was fueled by fury over both the racial profiling and the disrespect shown toward a war hero. The cry, "Respect our soldiers," reverberated through the walls of the airport, causing the entire structure of the organization that had wronged Marcus to shake. The employees of the airline and the security personnel inside were visibly anxious, and management rushed to control the situation. However, the throng outside just got more agitated. Got louder, the pressure increased, and one of the reporters at the gate, seeing an opportunity, followed Marcus aggressively. "Colonel, do you agree that the protest outside is justified? Do you believe that this event demonstrates systematic racism?" Marcus allowed the journalist a chance to speak. He understood the power of words, particularly when they left his lips, and any comment might become fuel for the fire. Marcus responded calmly, "I'm just here to bring my friend home." His response was straightforward, but the expression in his eyes revealed that he was aware of the power of words. During this time, airport executives were holding an emergency meeting behind closed doors, desperately trying to find a way to manage the fallout. Passengers were restless, flights were delayed further, and protesters outside showed no signs of abating. His eyes told a deeper story, a story of frustration, injustice, and unwavering resolve. causing a rising feeling of dread to build among the personnel as videos continued to circulate online, ruining the airport's reputation with each retweet. Management ultimately decided to write a generic public statement that said, "We are reviewing the events that involved Colonel Reed and will ensure that we take appropriate action." Marcus sat in quiet as he watched the turmoil around him at the gate. He was aware that all military members are treated with the highest respect, yet it was too little, too late. The public was not content with mere words. They needed genuine responsibility. Marcus slumped back in his chair, fatigued, but determined to bring Keller home. The world had turned his personal goal into a public spectacle, but all he wanted was to get Keller home. Reporters were hovering close, ready for more sound bites. Uncompromising, the struggle was not yet finished, but he was determined to see it through no matter how long it took, no matter how many hurdles were placed in his face. He would take Keller home with dignity and honor, and with the unflinching tenacity of a soldier who never gave in to the overwhelming majority of the mob that was outside the building. Their opportunity reverberating through the terminal walls, people crowded their noses against the glass to witness the developing demonstration. The call for justice reverberated via placards, shouts, and internet postings presenting Marcus Reed not just as a criminal, but also as a victim of the crime. Marcus sat in solitude by the gate, determined to remain focused on his purpose, despite the chaos that was going on around him. His calm demeanor hid the storm that was growing inside of him, and just as he was about to leave, he was a victim of prejudice. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he checked the screen to discover that there was an incoming call from an unexpected person named Colonel Reed. The voice on the other end of the conversation was deep. Things appeared to spin out of control, and a ripple of change started to take form. "Gentlemen, this is General Adams. I heard about the issue at the airport." Marcus stood up straighter. General Adams was a high-ranking commander who was recognized for his non-nonsense leadership and passionate dedication to his soldiers. Marcus felt a strong feeling of responsibility. "When I worked under him for a short period of time during a joint mission many years ago," General Marcus said, "Yes, sir, it has been complicated." Adams responded with a stern expression. "We are not going to let this slide. I am pulling some strings and giving me a decision." In a short amount of time, only a few minutes after the conversation came to an end, the airport workers started frantically scurrying. Word had filtered down from high places, and suddenly the attitude toward Marcus had transformed. Airline representatives approached him and offered him an IES that felt hollow. Colonel Reed was the one who responded. Marcus held the man's eyes, his look inscrutable, and said, "I don't need an upgrade." One of the attendants, stuttering uncomfortably, said, "We deeply regret the inconvenience. Please allow us to upgrade your flight and offer you complimentary access to our VIP lounge." "I need both my flight and the coffin to leave on time." The attendant paused, evidently taken aback by Marcus's denial. "Of course, sir, we are doing all in our power to speed up the procedure." Marcus gave a curt nod, but he wasn't sure he was serious. As the airport administration rushed to alleviate the damage, more supporters started to arrive, and one of them was a senior commander from Marcus's former regiment. He was not coming to apologize or to upgrade. Rather, he was here to keep a promise. Lieutenant Colonel Foster was an elderly man with silver hair and a commanding appearance. Despite the fact that he had retired from active duty, Foster still retained the respect of the military community and wielded power in the top ranks when Foster arrived at the base headquarters. Airport. It was as if there was a change in the atmosphere. He strode toward Marcus with purpose, his keen eyes taking in everything at a glance. Marcus Foster remarked to him while slapping him on the shoulder, "Heard that they were causing you difficulty." Marcus gave him a reprimand. There was a hint of a smirk on Foster's face as he shook his head, and a glimmer of indignation appeared in his eyes. He couldn't believe that a decorated officer was serving on an honorable mission, and this was how they treated him. He turned his attention to the airline personnel who were loitering close. "I regret every single second of this." When we were finished, the workers retreated uncomfortably under Foster's stern glare. Foster then got out his phone and started making calls. organizing other cops and authorities to place pressure on the airport administration. Meanwhile, Marcus received a message. General Adams sent a text message saying, "I've contacted the CEO of the airline, and they are quickly tracking your flight. Hang tight. We've got your 6." Marcus was grateful for the assistance, but he was aware that his focus needed to be firm since he wouldn't rest. After Keller arrived home a few minutes later, another unexpected person approached Marcus. It was a representative from the airline's corporate office, and his face was pale with apprehension. Colonel Reed initiated the conversation with a forced grin. "We want to sincerely thank you for your time and consideration." The representative continued, "We have arranged for everything." Marcus's stare remained steady, his silence heavy with significance, and the guy squirmed uncomfortably under the weight of it. "We apologize for the treatment you have undergone. This is not how we do business, and we profoundly regret any harm that may have been caused." Marcus gave a slow nod and stated gently, "All I want is to get my friend home." The representative then replied, "That's it. The aircraft is ready for priority boarding, and the coffin will be treated with the greatest care. We would like to give you our sincere apologies, and we hope that you will accept our gift of goodwill." When Marcus stood, Foster gave him a knowing look and said, "They're scrambling now, but you made your point. You've got people." Marcus exhaled, relieved that the confrontation was not getting worse. Of course, the flight crew is standing by and will make sure that everything goes smoothly from here on out. A little grin appeared on Marcus's face as he watched your back. "I didn't ask for all of this," he murmured. "I know what Foster said, but sometimes the right battles find you." Marcus nodded. He had learned a long time ago that not every war was waged on the battlefield. Some conflicts arrived when you were not expected to be there. As they made their approach to the gate, Marcus caught sight of the protesters outside through the enormous airport windows. People were holding placards and chanting as they made their way to the gate. Victory was not judged by medals but by honor. Marcus had a fleeting moment of something bittersweet as he turned toward the gate agent. He was grateful for their support, but he was also unhappy that this fight even needed to be waged. He demanded responsibility for a little minute. With Foster walking alongside him and the weight of Keller's memories leading him, Marcus took a step forward, one step closer to home. Who flashed a worried grin. "The flight is ready when you are." Colonel Marcus nodded once Leighton get started with Foster walking behind him. The jet touched down on the runway in Keller's hometown, just as the first light of dawn painted the sky in lovely colors of orange and pink. Marcus Reed peered out the window as the plane landed. Keller's hometown was one step closer to honoring a promise. He had made it through the never-ending delays, conflicts, and public spectacles, and now the last step was waiting for him. Despite the fact that his stance remained disciplined, his thoughts were concentrated on the somber duty that lay before of him. In the process of bringing his buddy to the family and giving Keller the proper goodbye that he deserved, the flight crew treated him differently, but Marcus was too concentrated to notice. As soon as the jet came to a stop, the coffin was carefully unloaded and put into a military transport that was waiting for it. As Marcus stood on the runway, he straightened the flag that was placed over the coffin. "One last time," he said. His fingers slid down the cloth, smoothing out every wrinkle. "We're here, brother," he muttered. Keller's family waited for their loved one to arrive at the gates of the small-town cemetery. Marcus was able to keep his emotions in control, since it was his responsibility to respect Keller at this time. His mother stood at the front of the room holding a worn picture of her son in uniform. The letter S was enough to crush even the most resilient heart. In accordance with what he had promised, an elderly guy with silver hair and worn eyes appeared before Keller's father. Marcus was approached, and Colonel Reed, who was speaking with a shaky voice, extended his hand to him. The guy was given a hard handshake by Marcus, who expressed his gratitude for bringing him back home. "I would want to express my gratitude to you, sir, for being my brother in every aspect that was significant." Keller went up next. and he always talked such that she could see tears flowing down her cheeks. "I have the utmost respect for you," she said, "in the event that anything were to happen to him." Marcus struggled to swallow the lump that had formed in his throat and nearly choked on it. "Unacceptable. I made a commitment to him, ma'am, and I will never breach my vow." Promises. The family, with a mixture of appreciation and grief in their expressions, gave a nod. They made gestures in the direction of the procession that was getting ready to march toward the burial place. The cemetery was silent. Respect permeates the air as rows of American flags line the route that leads to the final destination. According to the plan, which was intended for Keller troops and formal uniforms, citizens of the area had also assembled, and they were standing at attention with guns draped over their shoulders. Some were clutching flags, while others were wiping away tears. The news of Marcus's death had spread. Tripp, as well as the challenges he had encountered along the road, the community had returned back to him. Together, not just to pay tribute to Keller, but also to convey their appreciation for Marcus's unwavering commitment and selflessness. When the coffin was being transported near the gravite, the solemn sounds of sacrifice were heard. The sorrowful melody reverberated across the air as the taps were played by a solitary bugler. A last farewell to a soldier who had sacrificed all for his country could be heard through the woods. Marcus, the countryman, stood at attention next to the coffin, his hand raised in a distinguished manner. Each and every motion and movement was executed with precision. This was not only a perfunctory ritual, rather it was a heartfelt farewell to a person who had moved on. As the coffin was being lowered into the grave, Marcus was there to comfort his buddy and brother in arms. As he stood there, the burden of his vow began to settle deep inside him. He was aware that getting Keller home was just a part of the equation. As the ceremony drew to a close, the most difficult portion of the trip had finally arrived: releasing Go. The last message was delivered by Marcus, who came forward to give it. His voice was low and steady, yet each syllable carried the distance. Thomas Keller was less than a simple person when it came to memories, struggles, and grief. When Marcus first joined the army, he was a buddy, a brother, and a man of honor on the battlefield. We were dependent on one another in ways that only soldiers can comprehend while we were on the battlefield. I can't even begin to count the number of times he has saved my life, and when he fell, I vowed I would. The promise that I would bring him home today is one that I will keep." He stopped, his eyes moving across the space. Keller did not care about the pigmentation of my skin, or the race of the others that were present. Stripes on my uniform, he showed concern for the guy who was standing next to him, and here are the stripes. A moment of stillness, with the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the air, as it should always be. There was a moment of silence. Marcus removed his hand from his salute and took a step back, allowing the air to pass through his body. "The family of Keller will lay flowers on the coffin as a sign of respect to the community and the family." The members started to disperse, and others from many places approached Road Marcus to voice their opinions. There were many people who were shocked by the contempt that was given to him when they had heard about the agony that he had experienced at the airport. "We won't forget what they did to you," a guy of his size. One man stated, "It's nothing to be ashamed of. Something is wrong, and we will make sure that something changes so that another lady may wipe her tears away. That you brought him home, Colonel, is something that meant everything to us," her eyes emphasized. Marcus nodded his head, his countenance gloomy but glad that it wasn't the recognition he had been hoping for, had desired, but also served as a reminder that the struggle for respect was not even close to being over. Over the course of the evening, Marcus joined Keller's family for a small gathering at the restaurant. It was a modest affair in their house, with just close friends and family members reminiscing about the past, about the person that Keller had been. They exchanged memories, laughed while they were crying, and Keller's mother grabbed Marcus aside at one point and pressed a folded arm against his chest. Keller and Marcus found solace in one other's company, led her into his hand. It was before he went that Tom penned this letter for you, and she whispered that he wanted you to have it. You are aware that Marcus unwrapped the letter with trembling hands, and it was in case you were wondering. Marcus, if you are reading this, it is written in Keller's typical scrawl language, and is brief but profound. Please accept my gratitude for bringing me home safely, brother. I'll see you on the other side. This indicates that you have honored your commitment. Marcus was wounded by the words more than any wound he had sustained on the battlefield. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it inside his pocket where it was put next to Keller's dog tag. I'll see you on the other side for sure. The night came to a complete halt with a hushed murmur from Marcus, whose voice was heavy with passion. Marcus lifted his glass in honor of Keller, knowing that despite the fact that he was raising his glass, despite the challenges and the injustices he had encountered, he had accomplished what he had set out to create. It was via the act of bringing his brother back home that he had encountered a certain degree of. Marcus awoke early the next morning, the first rays of sunshine still coming through the window. Keller was able to see through the window of the little guest room where he had been that his body was exhausted, but his intellect was keen throughout his stay. Upon returning home, the job had been accomplished. Nevertheless, the events that had transpired at the airport continued to be a burden for him, and he was aware that what had occurred was not just a sequence of events. It was a reflection of something far deeper than the sad circumstances that had occurred. System that maintained a suspicious attitude toward guys like him, even when they were dressed in the uniform of their nation. Marcus sat for a considerable amount of time on the edge of the bed, staring at the TV. Keller's dog tag was in his grasp, and the battle was not yet ended. Keller's funeral had not yet taken place. Been a personal victory, but what he had through at the airport necessitated something more. It was time to take action later on. The phone of Marcus rang with a number of missed calls and texts that had been received that morning. As the word of the event at the airport started to spread, several media outlets were now reporting on the situation, and the demonstrations that started outside the airport were now taking place. Activists who were getting national recognition sought answers, and the public's indignation became more audible during the course of the. Marcus was taken aback when, within an hour, his email was swamped with messages from military personnel. Individuals of all races, including soldiers, commanders, and veterans, have voiced their opinions. Dismay at the manner in which Marcus had been handled at the same time as other individuals recounted their own experiences with prejudice inside the. Across the lines, it was abundantly evident to Marcus that this was not a unique event. Rather, it was a communication from General Adams that is a component of a far more significant issue. Appeared at the top of his email, "We are going to begin an official investigation, and this will not be ignored." Mattress Marcus let out a leisurely exhalation, aware that while inquiries and investigations were being conducted, he was not pleased with waiting for them since they were simply the beginning of something significant. Marcus, in order for people to take action, he needed to perform additional actions back in Keller's hometown. Engaged in conversations with local veterans and community leaders, many of whom showed a willingness to assist, and together they started the process. Building a campaign that is not only about Marcus's right to justice because, according to Marcus, however, in order to make structural reforms that will guarantee that no other soldier would experience what he did, we need accountability. Not just from the employees at the airport, but also from members of the military itself during one of their meetings. This is not just some. Regarding me, it is about every single soldier who has been treated with disdain and dismissed due to the way that they appear throughout the fight. Swiftly gathered pace with the help of political activists and groups affiliated with the military. The narrative of Marcus became a rallying cry for social media movements like #, which were covered by mainstream outlets. Justice for all warriors, as well as respect for these individuals, trended throughout the nation's large public. As the numbers started to come in, calls for change began to reverberate across the territory. While this was going on, the airport began an internal inquiry, which revealed that numerous personnel were. The airline released a public statement after the employee was put on leave, and the director of airport security was forced to quit. Despite the fact that many people saw it as being too little, too late, Marcus offered an apology. Got a personal letter from the chief executive officer of the airline expressing regret for the way the passengers were treated and vowing to implement. New measures will be implemented in order to avoid instances of a similar kind in the future. Nevertheless, Marcus was aware that this was not sufficient. The military also contributed to the. General Adams openly recognized the need for change and the mounting outrage that it generates. New training initiatives that are targeted at combating racial prejudice inside the organization have been introduced. Ranks Marcus was given an invitation to take part in the effort, through which he would contribute his voice to. Adams, the attempt to reform the culture of the military from inside, is not going to be an easy one to undertake. Marcus was informed during one of their chats, but it is essential, and we are going to do it. I've been through more difficult wars than you. Marcus nodded. We need individuals like you leading the assault. Seeing the joy on Adam's face was exactly what I was hoping for as the weeks went by in Marcus's life. When things gradually reverted to their previous state, the fight for justice continued to make progress. The airport and the airport both started to show signs of traction and real adjustments being implemented. While military Marcus was aware that the battle was not yet done, he had for the first time the feeling that progress was inside him. As time went on, Marcus's mailbox was greeted with a letter one morning. It was from Keller's family, and Mrs. Keller's penmanship was crisp and delicious. It was delivered to the doorstep. Free the words that are brimming with love and appreciation, Marcus, and thank you for bringing them to me. The commitment you showed to our child home meant the world to us, but more than that, we are grateful to you. We are all proud of you for speaking out when it would have been more convenient to remain quiet. Tom would be proud of you. Are Marcus's heart heavy with the thought of having read the letter twice? When he was overcome with emotion, he folded it gently and put it next to Keller's dog tag. In the quiet, a reminder of the connection that they had shared and the promise that he had always maintained. Following the events that had happened, Marcus pondered on all that had taken place. The journey had been a long one, and plenty of challenges, but he had managed to bring Keller home with dignity, despite the challenges he had encountered along the road. Although he had encountered prejudice, injustice, and unwarranted difficulties, he had also discovered supporters. Despite the fact that Keller's chapter had been met with unexpected support and the courage to continue moving on, concluded Marcus was aware that his own tale was not even close to being finished with the struggle for justice. Continue to do so for himself, for Kellerer, and for each and every soldier who had ever served in the military. Being evaluated based on the color of their skin, rather than the substance of their being. Character Marcus was seen standing at the window and looking out toward the horizon as a new day dawned, full of life and excitement. Marcus was prepared for the hardships that were still to come. He had fulfilled his word, and he was ready. Would continue to fight for what was right while holding Keller's dog tag in his hand for the whole battle. The words, "We're not done yet, brother, not by long," were said in a low whisper by Marcus to himself. Shot, and with that he walked forward, prepared to engage in whatever fights that occurred in the future. Instead of being a victim, he was a soldier, a brother, and a man of strong character. We appreciate you watching, and if you liked this story and would want to see more, please don't forget to press the subscribe button. The button for subscribing, stay with us for the next one, and while you're here, check out the next page. Check out our other videos, there is always more to discover. Where are you viewing from? Let's find out. Tell us in the comments section below.